of slaves who are buried there. Each one of these churches has families affiliated with it that, as Pastor Paul said, it's split off. But the original church was people from Union Grove, which was a white church. Now, can you go to the left? Yeah. A white church that was, the only place that the people enslaved here could go, but they had to be in a brush arbor, which was so they could be surveilled. It just means that there's brush on the top. They built it themselves. So when they got permission in 1868 to build the first black church here, or former slave church here, they also built a brush arbor as the first meeting place. And as we go, what you'll see is that, so for example, when Dominion filed its application for the ACP, they had to file cultural resource reports. But for Buckingham, they didn't. It was the only county that they just listed buildings in a code that said ineligible, but it didn't do any required surveys or anything on the actual property that they had purchased. So that was my first clue. So my PhD is from the University of Virginia, but I am an impacted person, meaning I moved to Buckingham in 1979 to help to co-found Yogaville, an intentional interfaith community here in Buckingham. Got involved in Buckingham right away. I didn't want to be in the silo of Yogaville, very interested in the history, but this event of this application just thrust me into using every bit of my anthropological PhD studies in archaeology, in ethnohistory, to uncover those cultural resources that weren't covered because they were erased. So the first thing that we did was, look around on the ground, and you can see how many homes there are here. Manufactured housing, new housing. There's a lot of them all over because this is a burnt county. What does that mean? Okay, so this...
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, not yet. So this is a burnt county, which means that all of the courthouse documents were burnt by vigilantes, and maybe you've heard me say this elsewhere, on February 26, 1869, when in the U.S. House Committee, they passed the 15th Amendment giving former slaves the right to vote. So in Buckingham, there had been a lot of foment and worry already about slaves being freed. So it was illegal to be a freedman in Buckingham before the end of the Civil War, or actually the surrender at Appomattox, unless 3 white plantation owners vouched for you, which was quite difficult. But a lot of people that you are going to meet are descendants of people who did that before the end of the Civil War. They met that criteria, they bought land, and their families are still here. So again, what you see in a burnt county is also burnt. Manufactured housing, manufactured housing, manufactured housing. Why? Because all the frame buildings have burnt, literally. And just a few of the old plantation houses remain because they were made of stone or they had a lot of brick. But for the most part, it was all wood. Now, for historic eligibility, it doesn't require in a rural historic district, which this is considered no matter the population, the landscape is what counts. Whether it has continuously been used by the same cultural group for the same types of things over a long period of time. And that makes this eligible. I have spoken with Mark Wagner, who is our representative to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources.
Okay, I was going to ask you about
Mark, yeah.
About whether you've contacted.
Well, I have, and he says it's eligible, but because this is not something I know how to do very well, I'm in over my head, but trying really hard, because it's just me working on it.
Have they ever done the Phase 1 surveys or anything?
Well, they say that they have, but they are so inadequate. So this is important. The Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, the ACHP, which is actually also the mediating body that when there's a problem over historic resources, wrote a letter to FERC, basically of major complaint about the lack of work that had been done in Buckingham, and the fact that no group, including our group, the Historic District Group that I formed to apply for Most Endangered Historic Place and received it in 2016 from Preservation Virginia, that no group has been given consulting party status, which allows you to see construction drawings and all the things you need to be protective. But we were refused by FERC, everyone. So I just want to make sure we don't.
Marie's house.
Did we pass the?
No, we're coming right up on the easement right here.
So
with
what
these
I want you to do is imagine that on the day that FERC passed, approved tree cutting to begin, which was going to be a certain period of time. At 5 o'clock at night, crews arrived at both Union Hill, but also at Yogaville, which is it's 5 miles as you drive, but as you crow flies much, much closer. And that's where the ACP wants to go under the historic wide flooding James River is at Yogaville. At that easements that they already had, they showed up at 5 o'clock at night, and we went over. I was at Yogaville, and we went over, and there were 15 trucks there, all from out of state. Not a single in-state person, even though one of the major forms of economy in Buckingham is timber forestry and has been forever, right? They'd had like 2 years to hire people locally to do that, and then that night it was Wyoming, Idaho, Arizona. We have those plates recorded. Ask people, is anyone from Virginia? No. So what you'll see here is a total mess, because and just started at 6 a.m. in the morning the next day, where there's this elderly woman living right next door. The timber is thrown in every direction at all of these easements, especially by the road. And so the paper mill here in Dillwyn that supported having the ACP was contacted saying, you can harvest all that. They came and they went, why are we going to do that? It's a total mess. They didn't cut. They cut to get maximum visual impact is the only thing that we were told.
So this whole area, that was...
continued on this side yet.
Okay.
That's an easement.
That's the easement.
A one
over there, it's
easement,
not,
and then it'll keep going. Those people haven't given permission. They're still in the courts and things like that. So what we're doing is kind of doubling around. You'll see the sort of the front, the actual front of the proposed compressor station. I hope while I've been talking, you've been noticing how many houses. So the other thing was that in Dominion's application materials, and then FERC replicated it, Dominion claimed that there were only 29.6 people per square mile here, which is the average for all of Buckingham County, which is generally rural. But as you heard me say, in the NEPA guidelines, it says do not use a census tract data for a big piece of infrastructure like this, because you will miss much higher populations and clusters of African American, Native American, and other minorities, including impoverished people. So they have allowed that to stand. But you and Dominion and anyone with eyes to see can see that there are closer to 99 households in that square mile area, not 29.6 people. I mean, it's kind of to the level of absurdity, but we haven't been able to budge that number. It's over 100 if you go 100, if you go a mile, 0.1. So all of this isn't totally fixed, right? I mean, because we're constantly going around and learning more about it. We got thrown into this because of this application. We're doing our best to figure that out. But I created a household study. I've had lots of experience in anthropology. I am retired, but I am still on faculty. I have a faculty affiliation at UVA. Designed a household study that we went door to door with teams of local people and students from UVA. And we have a lot of data, but we don't have all of it. We were able to get to about 58% of those households, and then from that, we're still getting more information all the time, including existing health conditions. That was on the questionnaire. So we can talk about that. That's very important. Ages, there was the age ranges. There was people's history here, and interestingly, and Richard, and I'm sorry, what's your name? Edith. You correct me on anything. Ms. Harper, because from my understanding, I'm a local Buckingham person, but I'm not from Union Hill. I'm not African American. I'm not a freedman, so a descendant. So I may get anything wrong, and I really want you to speak up and correct me. But from what I've found in digging in UVA special collections and looking, is that because the courthouse was burnt, it burnt all records of enslavement, and that was its purpose. That's why in the next day or so, if it passed the 15th Amendment, that meant that twice as many former slaves were going to have the right to vote. And I started reading the newspapers of the day leading up to that, and even during the Civil War and before, even long before the Civil War started. The anxiety about freedmen was that not only would they foment, maybe, which they never did, any violence, but they could maybe sue for restitution from enslavement. So now, the Civil War is over. Now former slaves are getting the right to vote. Now in Buckingham, there's more than 2 times that population. Wouldn't they then sue for restitution for enslavement? So all wills, listing, all farm ledger, all deeds, all of those things burnt.
And I heard you use the term burnt county
That's
earlier.
a term.
Is that was this a common occurrence in counties throughout Virginia at that time? All of a sudden, courthouses seem to burn for that reason to destroy the records?
That's an interesting question.
African American, yes.
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that. I know that burnt county is a term.
Okay, because I've never heard the term before, but it makes sense in that context.
And there was a burnt county before. So Buckingham, Albemarle, Louisa, all of those were one county during the Revolutionary War. And the British burnt the Scottsville courthouse, which burnt all the records of Buckingham prior. And so we had, here colonists who came in the late 1600s, got a huge land grant, Cabell. If you've heard the name Cabell from Cabell Hall, I was at UVA, it's like, oh, it's Cabell's everywhere. Yeah, Cabell's lived here. They got a huge land grant, both sides of the James River, because that's the way the Monacan Indians lived here too. The river was the road, was the pathway. And so they always used both sides, and so the land grants were on both sides.
I'm getting ready to grab my parent. You want to tell this what they refer to?
So this is where Jack lives.
Yeah, separated by race, but this is a very short road. So on this side it's called Woods Road, and on this side it's called Union Hill Road. And then on the topo, of course, they call it Woods Corner.
Okay.
So that's what, and this happened later because of emergency vehicles. When we moved here, they were all route numbers. Then they decided to give them all names. So this was recent. Now, this is one of the closer houses.
Not up to Ella's yet.
Yeah, we're not to Ella's, sorry. All of these on both sides, so this kind of southwest side are all considered part of Union Hill. Again, pretty highly populated for a place that is going to be forced or threatened by this. It's so big that it'll spread emissions pretty far, and that's the big concern. But I wanted to give more background. Yeah, testing here because nobody else did. So she has it. She has a baseline water testing. I mean air emissions testing. And we're going to move those around. There'll be 1 month inside and outside, and then they'll move to another house.
So you're getting baseline.
We're getting baseline existing health conditions, baseline water wells, baseline air.
For which pollutants last you make?
Well, we can give you the full list.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it. Yeah, and that took us almost 2 years because we had no help. We had to figure out, and then we're now working with a woman in Nelson County who's a
you have some data maybe now you can share with us?
Sure.
Is anything ready?
Well, I mean, I will refer you to Heidi Diviabertu, who is actually collecting that data right now. So where we are, okay, so you'll remember that too, right? We definitely want to send you everything we get. That's why we're doing it. because, so where we are,
There's a car coming up behind me.
can you pull in right there, or is it too, can you pull in to the next?
This Transco is going to be on the.
It's been in the ground for over 50 years.
I thought it's been here.
Yeah, it's been here a very long time. It's had updates, it's gotten wider. It's 4 pipelines though. And how it goes is that, as you see here, just to the left is going to be, like on this left side, is going to be the major complex right next to the road. So there's so many things that are problematic about that in terms of what I've read about industry standards. So you can see this is a 2-lane road, right? Like all of the Buckingham roads, basically, except for 60 for a little while. This is a major north-south route. They intend to face this, so all trucks going in and out, to face onto 56, but they're not planning to build a turn lane, they're not planning to sort of make it easier for the people who live here. And that's one of the biggest concerns people said right from the beginning, is like, this is where we live, this is where we work, this is the schools, the school route, but all of these trucks that are going to be going along here, what's going to happen to our existing life, to our quality of life? And this is the kind of thing that it's very important to think about. And when you live in a city, Richmond or somewhere, but I've lived out here so long, moved into Charlottesville, but this is where I've lived so long. Rural situations are so different. There isn't a backup road to this. In order to not go on this, you go on gravel roads behind, and then you're up and down, and then you're way out of your way. And so this is truly something that will completely interrupt the economy right now. And that's a huge concern to us. There's existing businesses. Part of our household study, we found out all of the existing things that people are doing that they're concerned about, whether it's raising dairy cattle or whether it's having a spiritual retreat where 10,000 people come a year to breathe clean air just a few miles away. This is major interruption of those, uses of the clean air. And that's why we came here. We picked Buckingham because of the clean air. Now we understand that this site was chosen also because of the good ambient air, which is in the original Dominion air permit application to DEQ, which I read with a fine-tooth comb, where they said that above normal ambient air allows them to go to put higher yearly averages of some very difficult emissions. So so this is what's already here. As you probably heard, Transco just filed with FERC this last week saying it's duplicative. Everything, they just filed a claim.
I thought you were going to talk about the
ACP is duplicative
of Transco.
They don't need, but the whole line is covered already. And this is if you've gotten any filings from Tom Hadwin, and we'll be happy to send you everything that he's written. And he's a former gas and utility executive who has been looking at sort of the overall picture about energy in Virginia. He's really dedicated himself. He's retired too, like me. He's using all his spare time to do this kind of work. And so he's written very clearly about this Transco right here can cover everything that the ACP wants to do, and then some, till 2040. And that was, of course, Commissioner Cheryl LaFleur's point in her dissent, and now recently Commissioner Glick, who wasn't at that time on the commission. But so that's what we're asking. Like, this is already here. This is a huge piece of infrastructure. What you can't see, but I'm going to describe for you, is what is planned here, right? So they're planning the 4-pipeline Transco to intersect with the ACP just a little ways in, and it happens to intersect right in the middle of a major wetlands area underground. Now, picture the level of population that you saw already, and then, multiply that by all the sites around it. The only source of water in Buckingham, except a tiny little area of Dilwyn that has municipal water, is individual wells. 100% of our water is from our individual well. And all of those wells are surrounding this site. on 3 sides. They didn't put it out in the middle of nowhere. They put it in the middle of a neighborhood. And so one of our huge concerns is about that intersection underground because of all the pipeline leaks that are happening routinely. Whether this is flat or not, this is 200 miles from the West Virginia compressor station, right? 200 miles. And that isn't industry standard. Again, I've read that closely. Industry standard goes between 40 to 60 to 70 at the most, right? And there's a very good reasons why they do that. I mean, I'm not a pipeline developer, but the industry says that. To spread them out is far better. It lowers the risks and hazards. They don't have to amp it up to such a degree to go 200 miles this way, to go 200 miles that way, which is the plan. So thinking of that, and then by saying that there's only 29.6 people per square mile, and so they're not really saying that. They're saying we use census tract data and that's enough. But by doing that, they've virtually wiped out the real information of the numbers here. So they can call this a rural designated site. That changes the thickness of the pipes that are allowed to be used. They can be 75% thinner. That increases the shutoff valve distances. So at this site, they have applied, and it's in the FERC FEIS, 15.6 miles between shutoffs. Now, this is important for air emissions, right? Because that is what when that leaked anywhere along here, at the intersection or up there, whatever, they would have to allow the venting of all of that contents for that larger shutoff valve distance. Again, endangering a whole lot more people than if they had applied for the actual number of the population. That would have been different.
They would have to put the shutoff valves closer to each other.
2 miles. 2 miles apart or 5 miles apart. They didn't go the longest is 20. They went 15.9. So that's almost to the longest. So these are the kinds of things where we're like, what the snowball effect of their not using the correct population, of not following NEPA guidelines to say, Buckingham was the only county where FERC didn't hold a public scoping meeting, which in the NEPA guidelines it says you do that so that faith leaders and leaders in the community, politicians, in our case they didn't come forward, could state to you what the actual population is. Like, no, this isn't an unpopulated place. There's tons of people here, but they didn't hold it. And we don't know why, but it perpetrated the misinformation. They didn't hold a public hearing for the DEIS comment period. In Buckingham was again. We had to go all the way down to Farmville. Again, lots of elderly people, long distances to travel. We were the only ones that weren't given it. And we asked why, when there's such key infrastructure, some of the most uniquely impacting infrastructure in Buckingham, we have to ask that question, like, why is that the case, right? So the implications and cost benefits to them of erasing the majority African American community here, that it's at least 75. I said 85 before. I'm saying I think it's closer now that I've really been diving into each one of the questionnaires. I think it's closer to 75. That still racks very much higher than the average census tract, for Buckingham.
And that's within a 2 mile?
No, it's what we did was 1.1 miles.
1.1 miles, okay.
Yeah, and again, I drove it.
Right.
I'm a very low tech academic. Anthropologists, we like to go hang out with people, have them tell us stories. So I didn't have GIS on my phone, but I drove it, and then I said, okay, you've gone as far. But in anthropology, and I think this is important, this is a culturally congruent area. I didn't go past, like Preservation Virginia, which is the oldest statewide nonprofit, wanted, to extend our district way out, but these were not all. I felt like we can only talk about what I can back up with a very little bit of the data that we have from special collections at UVA, from different deeds. of families all interrelated here, so that we can call this a place. You know, it's not like we're trying to take all Buckingham off the map. We're just saying, wait a second, these people are related. These were plantations where the families were related.
Yes.
And the Harpers,
Since 1885.
no, it's earlier than that. According to Charles Harper, right? So I had a long conversation with Charles. He was one of my main persons to tell me.
The discrepancy is between 1862 and 1885. I was just told to me this past week that it was 1885.
Well, I'll tell you.
We looked at the actual deed.
That you owning that land.
Yeah.
What I've been doing is going into the Bondurant family's documents that they have just loaned to the University of Virginia. So I can't publish them or anything, but I can show you the kinds of things that I found. And what I found were for this land that used to be Variety Shade, and also, so we don't know exactly, again, they're burnt. The courthouse deed records are burnt. But we have all kinds of his ledgers from Bondurant.
Who's Bondurant? Is he the
Colonel
big landowner?
Thomas Bondurant was the grandson of Dr. I don't remember his first name, Jean-Pierre Bondurant, who came in 1700 as a Huguenot refugee to Chesapeake. The Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth, the colony of Virginia under the King welcomed with open arms the Huguenot Protestant refugees here. And so that their children they went to Mannequin, Virginia, on the Chesapeake, bought this land, and then I found grants from Governor Jefferson and Governor Monroe. Both have been presidents, to Bondurants here. But in looking at there, I found Harper names. Go ahead.
Proposed camp.
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump to the complex. On this side, that the owners, had clear cut. That's a usual way. Go to the paper mill, get some money. But they had planned a greenhouse business here. The compressor station happened. Dominion just recently, because of the uproar about the environmental justice issue, approached them to say, why don't you put a man camp there for our construction workers? And of course, we really thought that was a terrible idea, because we've studied the quote-unquote medical science and criminal science, and even made comments about it being in Dillwyn, which is a little town, because of the amount of prostitution and drunk driving and traffic issues and people who are not rooted here. They're from all over the country. There are no jobs here. They didn't even give a tree cutting job to a Buckingham person, a place that is known for clear cutting. So we're going to turn at Sheldon's store.
Because the two commercials that they created, they exemplified, Dominion.
Yeah,
Two different black folks.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Got a lot of play.
Yeah. They're hiring, giving all these 17,000 jobs, but no one in this area, in this environment, has gotten anything.
Yeah,
so
not even
that was exploited.
Recommended them all on the very first day, and so we have that in evidence. They really didn't. So at that complex, they're hoping to have a 125-foot Wi-Fi tower instead of fiber optics, which they told us that they were going to have originally because of issues of weather and vandalism, and even the Planning Commission was concerned about terrorism, because they're going to remotely monitor it from West Virginia. So we wanted state of the art. They promised the state of the art. They reneged on it. The community at that Planning Commission meeting about the Wi-Fi towers said, well, if we have to have Wi-Fi, we don't have internet out here, and Mary will attest. You get out here and you're like if you don't have a really good hotspot, you are out of luck. So the community said, could we please somehow tap into this thing if it's going to be interrupting our beautiful night sky with all these lights and everything? And they didn't. This is what you have to understand, why we're all pretty exercised here. They didn't even pause. They didn't think, we'll get back to you. They didn't even do PR. They just said no, like the next breath. So that would have been a great, see again, lots of people all clustered around here. These are the people closest to the compressor station, and it's the most populated part of Shelton Store Road, which is the one that we're on, which forms, so it's sort of a triangle. It's like kind of a rough triangle around a very triangular piece of property in which the Transco goes right through the apex and then down. And Dominion keeps telling us, well, we couldn't put it anywhere else. We have to intersect with the Transco. So I think.
Tell you why that was?
Yes, we know exactly
what's
why,
their
but
story
not
on
from
why?
them.
Uh-huh.
They have built up the Coves Point LNG facility to the tune of whatever billions of dollars, right? At their stockholder meeting, they showed us pictures of it. I went with a proxy so that I could speak. That's how they opened it. It was about the Coves Point LNG offshore sending this, which is why they want to hook up to Transco.
So they're actually going to hook up the ACP. I mean, it's not just
It's bi-directional,
intersecting.
so they can send it whichever way they want.
It's tri-directional.
So they're actually going to hook up to
they're going to hook
they're
up.
seeking from my family is where they're going to have that connection.
Exactly.
On our land.
So the Harper Homestead home place, where every year they have huge, they have, not every, most years, they have a lot of reunions. Who are you talking to? Is very, very close to the connector. And maybe you can help me, Miss Edith. I went with Miss Cora trying to find the burial sites, and she couldn't, and there were ticks and stuff, so we decided not to keep going.
I couldn't have
Yeah.
A portion of the wetlands is on our property as well. And we have a natural spring on our property. Tap through the Transco and then come back around. So it's kind of tough pill to swallow. We're still in litigation in Roanoke where, they haven't gotten to that point yet.
On the eminent domain.
Eminent domain, yeah.
And that's also why people are so concerned about this. Is a shared aquifer. There isn't, multiple aquifers, and it's connected to the James River as well. And that's where they want to put the underground horizontal drill at the James. But this is a county that has over 125-year history of earthquakes that I found, again, in special collections. The people have been recording them that long, and then they saved it. Every year we get multiple earthquakes, and then the epicenter has been in Buckingham as well. When we had a geological study, when the geological study that Dominion commissioned, it talked about the fact that it's karst there, and then under the karst is basically the fault line. So it just couldn't be a worse place to horizontal drill under a river that seasonally floods every single year. I mean, at Yogaville, you don't know this, maybe you've been there, we built an interfaith temple in the shape of a lotus, literally, Light of Truth Universal Shrine. And we did a sort of human-made pond around it. We've had floods where the James has come all the way up to the top of those pedals, which is 100 feet. And so, somebody's plane drifted by, from a farmer airstrip. So that hasn't been mentioned or taken into context. And the fact that then that's sort of, we're at Union Hill, sort of, what if you want to say, downstream or upstream, depending on which way. This is the Transco at the top property, family property. They grow cattle. And
So his family owns this
From
property.
my knowledge, I'm not sure.
And the
It was
Goodins
built
or
before I was
Freedmen,
born.
to tell you, that split off. There was a little dispute between brothers. They formed this other church. There's some very, very, very old graves in the back there. And the thing that's important to know that I've found by going to all the graves and etching them and writing them, and then there's another cemetery. Can we just let them see that? So before this church was built, there was a family cemetery over here to the right. Wait, it's to the right, no? Used to use it. So the feeling is that there's a lot of former slaves buried here, but they don't have markers. They weren't when they were slaves, but then when they died, there's a sense in those families. Again, it's oral history. So, what do you think? We should turn around maybe and rural historic district. What do you have left? You have cemeteries. So, this is what, in our questionnaire we asked about where people's families buried because we couldn't really ask about slave history because it was burned. And so, all on this side you have a bunch of former Confederate lands. Well, all of it was former Confederate lands, but I mean, these are descendants of Confederate soldiers, and their burial area is right over in that woods. So what you have here in Union Hill area, I don't know how to say this enough, and the people who live here are so used to it that they don't even realize how unique it is. That this is one of the few places in Virginia left where the descendants of former plantation owners are living right alongside and across the street and around the places where the people that their family had enslaved still live as well. The descendants are still living here. That changes everything about conversations. And I think Dominion counted on the fact, Mr. White's going to be like, what are we doing? Mr. White is a notable person in the community because he decided to take on the erasure of all African American history.
I thought Charles White was standing.
Business, a greenhouse business. We're upset. We wish he wouldn't, cave because we feel like, and he said, well, we want to do something. But anyway, this is Mr. White's latest version. This is the second edition. He did all the research over 35 years without any courthouse records. So he went into Confederate pension records. He found, people who had been who went as body servants, as slaves. He found Revolutionary War things, so we know that there's the Laurie name in there. A lot of the names that are still in the graveyards right now went as slaves to people serving in the Revolutionary War. So that's the only data we have to tell us about that this is a freedmen community because they're still sitting in the van with you. They're still at all of our Friends of Buckingham meetings. Yeah.
Our descendants.
Be a nice, clean place to have a dairy farm. Like Carlos, he said, perfect place for me to raise milk dairy. And he's like right next to the compressor station.
John Laurie, same thing.
John Laurie, we're going to pass. He grew up here. There's a lane, named after his family and how long they've been here. He came back after serving in the military, bought some land, put in cattle, and now it's like, oh my gosh, are they going to even have water to drink that's not polluted? So, again, it's hard. This is why we asked you to come in person. It's kind of hard to convey all this, in paper.
Sure, it's great to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Really
it is something
matters,
special.
And we just knew that if people would see it, they would understand more. And the other problem is being rural. Like the big environmental groups have, sort of helped, but not leaped on. We have Southern Environmental Law Center represents Friends of Buckingham, but they're wrapped up in these conservation, litigation that's working well to stop it for a little while. But the environmental justice part has not really been taken on in a way that, the Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, getting to meet with them and giving our evidence, and then they just went, oh my gosh, we didn't even know about this, how could this have happened? But it was really taken out of the records, so how could they know? And we would be saying it and never having, the papers cover it, or trying to reach out to reporters. And I have given so many presentations to historians. There's a whole group in Charlottesville that's very interested in African American history and former slave. They don't want to come out to Buckingham. That is the bottom line. It is so rural. They don't want to drive out here. They worked to stop the bypass in Charlottesville for one grave site that led to a freedman town that nobody lives in anymore, that's related to freedmen. And we have freemen everywhere. Yeah, and we couldn't get them interested. So what? Almost, yeah.
Our houses, you know, so it extends beyond coming further this way as it does going toward 56, you know, with the 52 acres.
Yeah, and all along here, there's your other Harper cousins. I don't know what they are, how exactly y'all are related. There's all the Perkins family that's been here forever.
Everyone's related.
Huge Haskins, Royal Haskins. They're all related to each other. All the Mosleys.
We all descended.
And if you look at the plantation names, those are all. Oh, the owners are Mosley. So not only this came here to build this up, and now they're completely threatened. That whole operation, because all their water is from surface or well water. So and the air. We know from studies that animals are very affected by air emissions, just as easily as humans. We just went past Lori Lane. That's their home place.
That's Lori's, yeah.
So they bought that after. Again, we don't have records of the dates. Wait, there's one more thing. I just think so many of these questions that we're bringing up.
They're just along the line with us in the 1800s.
Well, but again, where are the deeds? It's really hard to find the deed records because of the burning, and it has to be passed down and all of that. Up here, I don't know if we told you that at Union Hill Church was also one of the black schools. So there were two, one at Union Grove and one at Union Hill. And the one at Union Hill only got burnt fairly recently. The one at Union Grove was moved to what they call historic zoo. So they moved it down to Route 60. I guess in closing, what I have to say is this site brings up some of the most important issues, really, of our time in Virginia. I mean, here we have the issues that happened in Charlottesville over the legacies of slavery. How do we think about it? These folks are living it and have been living it for generations of discrimination, and that's led to people not wanting to talk about race because they go, no, don't upset it. We've lived here. We're trying to keep, but this event, this happening has finally brought blacks, whites, people from different churches together because it is beyond, just the personal.
And as she was saying, that was as me growing up here. And I grew up basically in New Jersey, and there's never really much of a racial issue. I grew up with white folks, you know what I mean? So, but coming down here, we couldn't talk about that, because of, and I'm sure it's out of past fears that something would happen to our family if we did.
Well, there was retaliation even at special use permit. And it wasn't just by, white business owners. This county is all extraction economy. That's the other thing I provide. And I really want to say it had a gold rush in the 1700s. The Monacan mined copper, and the copper mine was a big deal here for a very long time. And then we had slate quarry, now a kyanite mine that has a cancer cluster around it of people dying from cancer. And we have clear-cut forestry, and we have 2 prisons. So the people, I'm going to speak now as the people of Buckingham, we don't want one more extractive thing to harm people that doesn't bring clean energy and clean jobs. We really appeal to everyone to say we want renewable energy. Look at how many fields there are. Look at how many farms. We have begged Dominion to put solar farms on black farms, not just on the 2 white farms that are over by Route 60. Because, and then I'll stop, but in Dominion statements, they have said, just blithely, that having this compressor station here brings a lot of value to Union Hill because of the utilities. And that, I just have to tell you, even though I'm an anthropologist, even though I have a PhD, is a blatant lie. They have never supplied utilities to this county except a tiny bit of Dillwyn again. We have a co-op, and they buy the things from that, but they don't build the infrastructure that Dominion said they would need. Could you close it? They would need in order to have electric turbines here instead of gas turbines. They said, no, it's too rural and there's not the infrastructure for electric, and that's because of them. And so it's these constant double whammies that the people here receive by being rural enough to not get any of that, but by being too black to get the fair, equitable access to renewable energy even in the county. So, you know, I'm sorry if I'm whatever, but it's just so moving.
The last minute, a week or so ago, want to offer all of this. What can we do for the community?
Yeah, they're worried now.
Yeah, now they're worried. You know, what can we do for the community? They want to build a store. They want to build a nursing home. They want to build a school. Yeah, meals. They want to. Yeah. And that is such a patronizing effort that if I were at that meeting, I would have smacked one of them in the face and probably went to jail.
Don't go there. Don't go there.
Because it was just like a patronizing gesture.
I saw that letter.
That's
Sent a letter.
But all along,
They signed people in. They said they had consulted.
the planning commissioners wrote in their plan to send to the board of supervisors that there would be a bond, several, like maybe $10 million set aside if this were built for the people of Union Hill to pay health care costs, for anything, explosion, for houses.
Costs.
Well, that wasn't in it, but yeah, well, maybe if their homes were destroyed. You're right, absolutely right. Not for the whole community.
Right.
This is like $10 million, right? And the planning commissioners showed that to the public the night before they were presenting it to the board of supervisors. Literally, the night before, Dominion offered Buckingham's Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commissioners an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that besides the fact that ACP is not a distribution pipeline, that they would offer access to the contents of the ACP to the people of Buckingham through Columbia distribution line. Now, they didn't have an MOU from Columbia saying we're going to pay $5.6 million for this little leader to go into Buckingham, despite the fact that Buckingham is losing population because there's no jobs. So who are we going to put? Despite the fact that Buckingham has lost its school accreditation, so we're not going to appeal at this moment to gas-fired industry at the very last second. So the very next day, they voted in favor. All plans for all of the, having people on site, not remote monitored, fiber optic, bond put aside, all off the table. That's what we're up against, and we are just little people,
One thing I'm particularly interested in, you mentioned solar projects.
Yeah.
Because that falls under, there it is, and we'll have that meeting shortly.
We have a proposal for you this afternoon.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for decades. Yogaville wanted to be completely, when we moved here, it was to be completely self-sustaining.
But that'd be interesting, but I'm interested in hearing why it goes to some farms and not others, and
well, they'll say it's about existing infrastructure.
Dominion's supposed to be making a huge investment in solar under the Grid Transformation Act.
Well,
you may have heard of that.
Exactly. And the fact that that is actually
I have some folks who might be very interested in the solar stuff.
Yeah.
Has anyone mentioned that stuff to the governor's folks yet?
I will show you the research that we're doing. We've got to go. There's people who are confused.